Hey, what's up guys? This is Magic, your non-native and non-AI English language teacher, and we're back with another paragraph challenge for you. As usual in these paragraph challenges, we'll be focusing on tricky words, especially in terms of the sounds that are tricky for non-native speakers. We're going to be focusing on word stress, on sentence stress, and other features of connected speech. And finally, we're going to be mentioning intonation as well, because this is also a very, very important part of English pronunciation. So, without further ado, let's have a look at this text. Our first word here is the word valley, and in here, the challenge for non-native speakers is pronouncing those last two letters, this EY at the end of this word. A lot of learners have a problem here. They don't know how to say it, but good news is that the majority of words in English that finish in EY are pronounced with the simple E sound, a short E sound at the end. So it's basically valley. Valley. Our next word, our next very challenging word, I should say, in this text is the word, how would you pronounce this? Lots of students get that wrong, and this is pronounced as desert. Now, the interesting thing about this word is that it's actually a homograph. It can also be pronounced as dessert, but everything depends on which part of speech you use this as. So, for example, in this text, it's a noun, and as such, it's pronounced as desert with a strong stress on the first syllable and the short E sound in that first syllable, desert. If we pronounce this word as dessert, it would be a verb that's used as a synonym, for example, to the verb abandon. So somebody can desert you, or a building can be deserted. Okay, but in this text, very clearly this is used as a noun, and we need to say desert. Our next word is also an interesting one, and arguably it's also a homograph, so a word which is spelled in the same way but can be pronounced in two different ways. But in here, the difference in pronunciation isn't as big, and the difference is basically in the stress of this word. So in British English, we're going to say located. Located. Strong stress on that second syllable and the O sound in the first one. In American English, on the other hand, we're going to say located. Located. So we still have that O sound in the first syllable, but the stress has now also moved to the first syllable. So in American English, located. In British English, located. And since I speak the British accent, I'm going to read this as located. Our next word here is a very, very simple word, arguably. It's a very basic word. It's the past participle of the verb know, but a lot of students, surprisingly, to me at least, get the pronunciation of this word wrong. And basically all we need to do to pronounce this word correctly is to say no and then add the N sound. So, known. Known. Not much else to say here. Let's move on to another word. And this one also contains the O sound. So far we have had quite a lot of these words with the O sound. We said located, or located rather, in British English, known, and now it's holds. Holds is a particularly difficult word when it comes to pronouncing the O sound, because that O sound is followed by L. And whenever O is followed by L, and there are many words like these in English, for example, gold, fold, cold, lots of those. This presents a particular problem. So it's difficult basically to go from O to saying L. But this is exactly what you need to do with this word. So it's holds. Holds. Now the next word is actually also a homograph. So again, just to revise this concept of a homograph in English, a homograph is a word that's spelt in exactly the same way, but it has two different pronunciations. And in fact, this word, I'm going to highlight it twice in this text because it's used differently as different parts of speech, and depending on which part of speech you use this word as, you need to pronounce it differently. So, that first one here is a noun, and we're going to put the stress on the first syllable and pronounce it as record. Record. On the other hand, this other one is used as a verb. This one is, of course, a verb in the past, but the infinitive would be spelled in exactly the same way, obviously, as the noun, and we would now put the stress on the second syllable and pronounce it as record. Record. And of course here, since it's the past, we're going to say recorded. Recorded. So on the one hand, it's record, and on the other hand, it's recorded. And by the way, if you're enjoying this exercise, if you feel your pronunciation is improving and it's useful for your English, do become a member of my online learning community. It's completely free, and the link is in the description. Oh, and actually, if you upgraded your membership to premium, I would actually give you feedback personally on your pronunciation. All you'd need to do is basically record this as an audio file, send it to me. I give you all the instructions on the platform on how to do it, and I will get back to you with feedback. It's definitely worth your time. Let's get back to the text now. Our next word is also quite a basic one. It's the superlative that comes from the adjective high, and we pronounce it as highest. Pay attention here that the GH inside this word is completely silent. This is something where a lot of students go wrong. And it's a really bad mistake. It makes this word very confusing if we don't pronounce it with a silent G and a silent H. So again, highest. Highest. Moving on, we've got one of my favorite words here because it's a really complicated word and it presents a problem for a lot of learners of English. And a lot of learners of English, when they see this, they go just, oh my God, how do I say that? Well, there is quite a simple rule that's going to help us to pronounce this word correctly, and that rule is to do with those 4 letters at the end there, the T-U-R-E ending. And in case you didn't know that, the T-U-R-E is pronounced as chair in a very, very similar way to the piece of furniture you might be sitting on right now. So it sounds basically like chair. Okay, it's just a little bit, a tiny bit shorter. Chair. Chair. So how do we say this word? Temperature. 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 You can apply this rule of pronouncing T-U-R-E as chair to practically any word in English that ends like this. There are only 3 exceptions to this. If you can find more, please let me know in the comments. But to my knowledge, there are only 3 exceptions to this. And it's the words mature, premature, and immature. And the only reason why these 3 words are pronounced differently is because the ending in these words, mature, premature, immature, is stressed. So if T-U-R-E is stressed, it's pronounced differently. But that applies to only these 3 words, because in general, any word in English, nature, future, picture, temperature, furniture, all of these words are not going to be stressed on the ending, and we're going to be pronouncing it as chair. So, temperature. Temperature. Now, speaking of temperature, how do you read temperatures in English? Because this is also quite a challenging area. We've got our own ways in our mother tongues of reading temperature. So how would you say this? I have to look at this actually on my screen to read this correctly. Okay? But we're going to say 56.7 degrees centigrade. 56.7 degrees centigrade. If you're reading numbers in English and you see that little dot, you have to pronounce that dot as point. This is quite important, yeah, because we've got different ways of pronouncing, of reading that punctuation mark in English. We can call it a dot, we can call it a period, a full stop, but when it comes to mathematical equations, I don't know, numbers in general, right? When it comes to numbers, we read this as point. Okay, so 56.7 degrees Celsius or centigrade, however you like to say this. Okay, and then we are moving on to our next word here, and this also has T-U-R-E at the end. So how are you going to say that? It's going to be pronounced as features. Features. So it's plural, of course. That's why we're adding the z sound at the end of this word, and we say chairs, right? But the chair is still there, okay? So it's feature in singular, features in plural, and it's really, really important to pronounce the first syllable with the long E sound. So features. Lots of students get that wrong. Next one is the word including. And in here, the challenge is pronouncing the U, the letter U, inside this word correctly. In here, the letter U is pronounced simply as U, okay? Include. Including. Just remember that, because some students pronounce it as you, and it just doesn't work like that inside this word. So it's include and including. Now, moving on, we've got the word colorful, and in here you need to pay attention to how that O in the first syllable is pronounced, and it's pronounced as the short A sound. Color. Colorful. Something worth remembering, because the letter O in English is very often pronounced as the short A, but it's not a rule by any means, because we can actually say the letter O in 12, I think, different ways in English. And if you'd like to learn all of them, consider becoming a member of Your English Upgrade and doing the Pronunciation Hacks course, which is going to teach you all those small patterns that influence the way you sound in English and will actually make you sound far better. Again, the link is in the description. So in here, colorful. Colorful. And right next to colorful, we've got another tricky word. Lots of students go wrong here. How would you say it? Listen and check. Canyons. Canyons. This is a really difficult word. We very often have a doubt in terms of how that A, that letter A in the first syllable, should be pronounced, but we basically should say canyon. This is a difficult sound to make. It doesn't exist in the vast majority of languages around the world, and we pronounce it by really parting our lips quite a lot and keeping our tongue at the front of our mouth. It's canyon. It's the same word, it's the same sound rather, that we've got in the word cat or bat, the animals, right? So cat, bat, canyon. Well done. Let's move on to the next one, and this is probably the trickiest word when it comes to pronunciation here. It's an advanced adjective that describes how those mountains look, how those mountains feel. Okay, and rugged basically means that it's not smooth. Okay, and did you hear how I pronounced this? I said rugged. Rugged. Now, what might surprise you in there is that I pronounced the ed ending as a separate syllable. And of course, we know that when it comes to pronunciation of ed endings, the only time when we're going to pronounce an ed ending as an extra syllable is when it comes after t or d. So that's why, for example, when it's want in the past, we're going to say wanted. When it's need in the past, we're going to say needed. And that's the only two cases when we actually pronounce the ed ending in regular verbs as an extra syllable. So why the hell did I just say rugged? Because it's not a verb, right? It's not a regular verb here. It's an adjective, and as such, it doesn't conform to the rules of the pronunciation of the ed endings, which you can also find on my platform, by the way. So it's rugged, okay? Rug is not actually a verb here. It's not the past or past participle of rug. No, it's basically rugged. It's an adjective here. And so if there are any words that have an ed ending that are not used as a verb, like, for example, naked or dogged, meaning very determined, yeah, another advanced adjective here for you, then you pronounce this ed ending just as a normal syllable, just as a syllable that's part of that word. Okay, so in here, rugged. Rugged. Okay, and then, obviously, this video wouldn't be complete if we didn't speak about the pronunciation of the word. How would you say this? This is probably, in my experience of teaching English for over 25 years now, I think I have met just a handful of students, just a small group of students, who in their first classes with me would say this word correctly. It's a very, very counterintuitive word, and it has two traps inside. We pronounce it as mountain, and in this case, mountains. So to start with, we have the ow sound in that first syllable. We say moun, and then the a in that second syllable is just silent. We don't say it. Yeah, if that helps you to remember how to pronounce this word, just remember you don't say that letter A. You don't pronounce it in any way. You just say tin, tin, mountain. And in this case, of course, it's plural, so mountains. Lovely. Let's move on. And we're moving on to a great, great verb here. And this verb is also very often mispronounced by learners of English. So in here, this is a verb that follows a specific pattern for many two-syllable verbs in English. This pattern is that we're putting the stress on the second syllable here, and the first syllable is very, very short. So it's survive. Survive. Did you hear how that letter U is pronounced inside that first syllable? It's just an sound, right? It's survive. So even though it might be very tempting for you as a non-native speaker, it certainly was very tempting for me when I was learning English as a non-native speaker to pronounce that letter U the way I saw it, as U or as U. Okay, and in Polish there is basically practically 100% correspondence between spelling and sound. It was natural for me to be tempted to say "u" here, okay, but it's not, because it's not a stressed syllable, and in English, unstressed syllables, especially in combinations like these where you have a two-syllable verb where the stress is on the second syllable, they're pronounced in a very, very, very short way. So, survive. Survive. Okay, and then we've got the word extreme. Extreme. This is a nice little adjective, and you have to remember about the long E inside. Extreme. And then, of course, there's the word environment. So lots and lots of difficult words here, okay? An environment, you have to remember to say vi, okay? Environment. Environment. It's a difficult word to say. You don't actually have to say the letter, that second letter N inside this word. You can say environment. Environment, this is in fact how most native speakers say it. If you have any doubts about that, check it on Youglish. But it's basically a word where the pronunciation of N, that second N, is practically optional in fast connected speech. So you can say environment or environment. And moving on, we've got the word national. And in here, I'm basically just showing you this word and focusing on this word because of that letter A in the first syllable. Some students want to pronounce that letter A in the same way it's pronounced in the noun nation. Yeah, so nation, the noun, is pronounced with the A sound, just as the first letter of the English alphabet, the letter A, nation. But when this word converts into an adjective, this letter A is pronounced as A. Again, the same sound as we had in cat, bat, and... which one was the other one? Now I have to look for it. Yeah, canyons. Canyons. So that's the same A sound, okay? And so we say national. National. And then, just to finish this text in terms of tricky words to say, we're going to finish it with, well, one of the most basic words in English, but it's also one of the most counterintuitive words in English. Why? Because as we said, there is almost no correspondence between the English spelling and the English pronunciation, especially when it comes to vowels. Okay, vowels, there are just 5 vowels in English in spelling, right? It's A, E, I, O, and U. Yeah? But these 5 vowels are all together pronounced as 19 different vowel sounds. 19 different vowel sounds in British English and 21 vowel sounds in American English. Again, you can learn a little bit more about that on my pronunciation hacks course on my platform. So yeah, in here, it's no surprise that the O inside this word is not going to be pronounced as O or O. Okay? We're going to say weld. Weld. So how was that letter O pronounced? It's pronounced as the long air sound. Weld. Weld. And this is a universal rule that you can apply to almost any word in English that has W-O-R followed by another consonant. Almost any word. So if W-O-R is followed by another consonant, and it's in a stressed syllable, which is the majority of cases of words that contain these 3 letters together, followed by a consonant, you basically pronounce them as were, in exactly the same way as the past plural form of to be. So we were there yesterday. Where? Weld. Weld. And this concludes our tricky words in terms of sounds here in this text. And now we're going to focus a little bit on word stress here. Again, the first word, not surprisingly, because we have already mentioned that it's a homograph, is the word desert. In this case, again, it's pronounced with the stress on the first syllable, really, really important, desert, and it can also be pronounced as desert if it was used as a verb, okay, meaning abandon. Remember that, okay? So here, a desert valley. And then, again, not surprisingly, we've got the word record in that first case, okay, record with the stress on the first syllable, and record, the second one here, with the stress on the second syllable. So record, the noun, record or recorded, as we've got it in this text, stressed on the second syllable. And finally, we've got a word we haven't mentioned in this text yet, and that's the word unique. Unique. Now, I can't tell you enough how important it is to pronounce this word with the stress on the second syllable. Don't say eunuch. Yeah, a lot of students do, and they said that they had a eunuch experience. But this is very funny, actually. I'm laughing. I shouldn't be laughing, but it's very, very funny because eunuch is basically a person without testicles. Yeah, usually a male servant in the past. Okay, so a man without testicles who served rich people was called a eunuch. Okay, this was stressed on the first syllable. The spelling is completely different. You can look it up in the dictionary if you like. But this adjective here is stressed on the second syllable. That second syllable has a long E inside, and it's unique. Unique. Okay, and now we're going to move from word stress and tricky word sounds to connected speech. Now, what's connected speech? Connected speech is the way that people speak English naturally, fluently, fast. Yeah, so very often what happens is that certain words in English have actually two pronunciations depending on how much stress you put on them inside a sentence. And there is a group of these words, which are prepositions mainly, okay? There are other words as well, of course, but I'm going to focus on prepositions here, that are generally words which we don't put any stress on. Yeah, we just don't stress prepositions because they're not important to the meaning of the sentence. So, because of that, they're going to be pronounced in this extremely short way with the sound that we have already mentioned when we were speaking about the verb survive. Do you remember that when we talked about the first syllable of survive, we said that it's pronounced, that letter U in survive was pronounced with that very, very short sound? Well, that's the sound that we're going to be practicing in the words I'm going to show you. So our first word is of, okay, and when you say of, yeah, as not part of the sentence, you basically pronounce it with the short O sound. But it's practically never pronounced like that in fast, fluent English, okay? It's actually pronounced as okay? But in order to pronounce it like that, we have to read the whole phrase where the word of is inside, okay? So, one of the hottest. One of the hottest. Can you hear how that little O in of was pronounced in this little phrase? One of the hottest. One of the hottest. So it's just very, very short and it's of. One of the hottest. And let's move on to another phrase like this. Listen. Places on earth. Places on earth. So again, the preposition on is going to be pronounced in two ways in English. Normally, if we say it as a separate word, we're going to say o, on. But inside a phrase like this, it's not an important word to the meaning of the sentence, so we're going to say un. Places on earth. Places on earth. And then, moving on, we've got another preposition, for. And again, for can be pronounced with the long or sound if, for some reason, some very, very strange, obscure reason, it would be important to the meaning of the sentence. But hey, prepositions are usually completely unimportant. They don't carry any meaning almost. So we don't put any stress on them. So we're going to say record for the highest. Record for the highest. So again, for just very, very short. Record for the highest. And then we've got one of those prepositions that's super, super common in English, and it's to. And again, the normal, let's say normal, the strong pronunciation of this word is with the U sound, to. But we very rarely, native speakers very rarely actually say to. They just say t. because it's not an important word to the meaning of the sentence. So in here, adapted to survive. Adapted to survive. And then we've got of again, resilience of life. Resilience of life. And then another preposition that we haven't yet had, which is from. And again, from in its strong form is going to be pronounced with the O sound. But hey, when was ever from an important word inside a sentence? It's never an important word on this, in the sentence. Practically never, ever. So again, we're going to be pronouncing this with this short little sound, from. And that's visitors from around the world. Visitors from around the world. And then finally, we've also got another to here, come to experience. Come to experience. And this concludes our work here on connected speech. Obviously, inside this text, there are many, many other features of very fluent, fast English that we could be focusing on, but this I normally leave for other paragraphs. There are, in fact, a total of 17 such lessons and paragraphs on my learning platforms. On my learning platform, rather, just one at this moment. And you can take a huge advantage of all of these lessons, which, by the way, I keep adding regularly to the platform by recording your own voice, reading these paragraphs, and getting feedback from me. All you need to do is sign up for the premium membership on the platform. Now, the one last thing that's left for us to do, but it's not the least important one, it's actually one of the most important ones in terms of pronunciation in English, is working on intonation. And in here, we're going to focus on two things. The first thing that we're going to be focusing on is making pauses. And pauses in English are very, very important. You'll see when you listen to native speakers, they make pauses in order to help their message be communicated effectively. And it's a very, very important part of English pronunciation. And one of the typical situations when we have to make a pause in English is when an initial phrase that starts a sentence is followed by a comma. So you can see that very well here in that second sentence in this paragraph. So it basically starts with in fact, and then there's a comma. So this is where we make a pause. Listen to how it sounds. In fact, it holds the record for the highest air temperature ever recorded. So again, there's a very, very nice pause after in fact because we've got that little comma. Try to repeat it with me again. In fact, it holds the record for the highest air temperature ever recorded. And this is in fact not the only place in this text where we've got such a little introduction followed by a comma. The next one is actually in the next sentence, and it's despite its harsh conditions, comma, and then the sentence continues. So again, we're going to make a pause after this initial phrase. Listen. Despite its harsh conditions, Death Valley has striking natural features, including sand dunes, salt flats, colorful canyons, and rugged mountains. Sorry, I made the sentence a little bit too long, and in fact it's a sentence we're going to come back to at the end of this text because it includes other features of intonation that I wanted to focus on. But there is a very clear pause after this initial despite its harsh conditions. So again, despite its harsh conditions, Death Valley has striking natural features. Very good. And our third case of a situation where we need to make a pause is in the last sentence of this text, which starts with the word today. And today, as you can see, again, is followed by a comma, and we need to make a pause there. So listen and repeat. Today, Death Valley is protected as a national park. And again, today, Death Valley is protected as a national park. Well done. And as promised, we're now coming back to that sentence in the middle that was the one I read out by accident, simply because I couldn't stop reading it. And it's a sentence that includes a lot of pauses and a lot of interesting features of intonation in English. So in English, when you make a list of things, you go down with your voice after every item on this list. So the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to imagine that this sentence finishes with the word canyons. Okay? So just imagine that this part with the rugged mountains is just not there. Okay? Because this is going to change the way the sentence is pronounced. But for now, just imagine that there is a full stop after the word canyons. Despite its harsh conditions, Death Valley has striking natural features, including sand dunes, salt flats, colorful canyons. So what did you hear in this sentence? Well, there were two pauses. The first one was after the first phrase, obviously, and then there was a little mini pause just before we were starting the list. Yeah, so we were saying, despite its harsh conditions, Death Valley has striking natural features. That little pause, including sand dunes, salt flats, colorful canyons. We're still imagining that there's a full stop after the word canyons. So my voice went down at the end of each item on that list, including sand dunes, salt flats, colorful canyons. Down, down, down. But the problem with this way of reading this list is that actually this list doesn't finish there, because the word canyons is followed by and rugged mountains. So there's a very complicated thing that we need to do here in terms of intonation after the word canyons. So we have to go down with our voice because it's another item on the list, and as we know, items on lists in English are generally followed by this falling intonation, but we also have to indicate with our voice that it's not the end of the sentence and that it continues. So it sounds like this, including sand dunes, salt flats, colorful canyons, and rugged mountains. So we go sand dunes, salt flats, colorful canyons, and rugged mountains. Okay, so you say canyons. So it goes down, canyons, and then up. Okay, really, really difficult to do, and it requires a lot of practice. And again, you can record yourself reading this text and send the audio to me. All you need to do is become a premium member on my platform. So speaking of reading the text, let's read this together and you can shadow read it with me. Ready? Let's go. Death Valley is a desert valley located in eastern California, USA, and is known as one of the hottest and driest places on Earth. In fact, it holds the record for the highest air temperature ever recorded, reaching 56.7 degrees Celsius, 134 Fahrenheit, in 1913. Despite its harsh conditions, Death Valley has striking natural features including sand dunes, salt flats, colorful canyons, and rugged mountains. Some plants and animals have adapted to survive in this extreme environment, showing the resilience of life. Today, Death Valley is protected as a national park and attracts visitors from around the world who come to experience its unique and dramatic landscapes. Well, I hope you really enjoyed that. I'm looking forward to welcoming you to my platform and hearing from you. And also let me know in the comments if you enjoyed this video. Take care and enjoy the learning process. Bye-bye.